There was no defense to the unrelenting push of the tsunami. A wave of debris, in places up to 10 meters high, moved like lava across farmland, swallowing everything in its path.
Tsunami has engulfed several cities.
It was a disaster in slow motion, so much so that it didn't seem real. The towns closest to the epicenter never had a chance. The only warning for the Japanese, a low rumble that turned into a roar as the wave shockingly tossed cars and shipping containers around like toys. In the ocean, a large whirlpool formed, slowly pulling this helpless yacht towards its vortex. On the coast, fishing trawlers were smashed by giant waves. And that's what's been witnessed. A ship carrying 100 people was reportedly swept away to sea, and a bullet train carrying hundreds of passengers is still unaccounted for. The Japanese Prime Minister immediately activated emergency plans to deal with a developing energy crisis. Fire crews were unable to get close to the Cosmo oil refinery near Tokyo after it exploded. The site was too hot. And officials ordered the evacuation of residents living near a nuclear plant as they struggled to cool down the facility. The two-part disaster began with an 8.9 magnitude quake that shook for 5 terrifying minutes. Even in Tokyo, 370 kilometers away from the epicenter, it felt like a direct hit.
Literally, the ground beneath us was rocking back and forth, really quite violently. I was just thinking, I hope I'm alive in the next few minutes. I hope that this tunnel doesn't collapse. I hope that I can see my family again.
And for hours after the quake, well over 50 aftershocks could be felt, the strongest measuring 7.1. The quake also disrupted communications in Tokyo. Trains stopped running and people who lived outside the city were forced to walk home or find some place to stay at the end of Japan's darkest day. Mike Drolet, Global News.
Japanese authorities are now trying to prevent a second disaster. A nuclear plant may be melting down. Thousands of people living near the site were evacuated in the hours after the quake, but just a short while ago, radiation levels outside the plant spiked, and the evacuation area is now being expanded. Tracy Wright has that story.
One of the most modern cities of the world is brought to a standstill. Tokyo's transit system frozen, 4 million buildings across the country without power.
A large fire.
Thousands of fires burn into the night at steel plants and an oil refinery. But the damage being watched most closely around the world is at this nuclear power plant, 260 kilometers north of Tokyo. With no power, officials aren't able to cool the reactor. 3,000 nearby residents were evacuated today and others told to stay indoors. The United States so concerned it offered to rush Air Force planes loaded with special coolant to the site.
They have very high engineering standards, but one of their plants came under a lot of stress with the earthquake.
Japan's Nuclear Safety Agency plans to release what it describes as slightly radioactive vapors, which it says pose no risk, to help bring the temperatures down. Those cautious about nuclear power say this is a reminder of why emergency response plans are so important.
It's more than the local or the regional response. We need to have a national response, quick deployment, get things in quickly so that the people in harm's way get as much help as quickly as we can.
Japan is heavily dependent on nuclear power to generate electricity for its almost 130 million people. With the country's 50 nuclear plants shaken by the earthquake and aftershocks, Japan has declared a state of atomic emergency. Officials say it's a precautionary measure, but Japan's prime minister will travel to the at-risk reactor tomorrow. Tracy Wright, Global News, Washington.
The earthquake also sent tsunami waves hurtling east towards Hawaii and the coast of North America. Warnings were issued along the BC coast and in California near the Oregon border. There are reports at least one person was swept out to sea.
Hawaii was first to be hit. Waves reached Honolulu in the early morning hours, swamping beaches and surging over breakwalls, but no damage was reported.
This is an emergency management message.
As a precaution, police evacuated people from the beaches and low-lying areas. So far, the waves have been smaller than first predicted. They then continue towards the BC coast. Residents in coastal communities like Port Renfrew were woken by the wail of tsunami warning sirens and told to move to a local school for safety. But when the waves hit at about 7 a.m., they were smaller than feared and no damage was reported. Emergency officials also went door to door to get the message out.
How concerned were you?
Fearful. My heart was pounding. I just was fearing the worst.
People started panicking and leaving to get out of town.
Just south in California, authorities shut down beaches, harbors, and piers. Strong waves in Santa Cruz pulled boats loose from the marina. In San Francisco, residents packed up their cars and headed for higher ground after authorities there issued an evacuation advisory, but many commuters waited out the waves on the side of the highway.
Canada's Department of Foreign Affairs says it is trying to locate 13 Canadians that it knows are in the quake zone in northern Japan. A total of 11,000 Canadians are in the country, and it has been a difficult day for their family members and friends back here in Canada as they try to ensure their loved ones are okay. Darlene Heidemann has that part of the story, and she joins me now. What have you been hearing from people, Darlene?
There are a lot of people across Canada right now who are very concerned about their loved ones. They don't know everyone's situation. Some people are getting through, others are having a very difficult time, but all in all, I can say that people are very, very concerned about what's happened in Japan.
In Vancouver, Japanese community volunteers still had work to do in the kitchen, but the destructive earthquake in their home country was on everyone's mind.
It's of course devastating. I know some people from the area, but it's hard to know the extent that they have been affected.
They say the pictures that they've been watching on TV and the internet look surreal, more like a movie scene than real life.
I haven't said nothing, just
Junko Takashima got a call at 3 a.m. from her family in Japan. They tried for 6 hours to call her to say they were all right. Junko is one of the lucky ones.
Shaking, and also the shells or some, the things come down and some place and sitting down.
He's another Montrealer who's in Tokyo, and he's okay.
Across Canada, anyone with a connection to the country has been trying to get a hold of friends and family, but it hasn't been easy. Power's been knocked out and many phone lines are down. They've been using Facebook and Twitter instead.
I tried calling, but the lines are completely blocked. I tried calling my colleague in Tokyo, and the same thing. Nothing is going through.
And it's not just family and friends. It's former teachers who have been to Japan to teach English, who are desperate for information. Carly Pinch taught there just last year.
Well, I was one of at least 70 international teachers that were there, so there would be several Canadians.
For the thousands of Japanese students studying here, the wait for information is even harder.
So very worried about your family, of course.
Yes, I am very worried.
Now, in just under 3 hours after the 8.9 magnitude earthquake in Japan, Google had its person finder service up and running. The app lets people report someone is missing or can report someone who has been found. Now, that website is set up in Japanese and English. There's been at least 2,000 entries so far.
Okay, thanks, Darlene. And what are you hearing about the possibility of an earthquake here in BC?
Well, there's been one report from BC's manager of catastrophic disaster planning, and she's saying that British Columbians should be on alert for the next 72 hours. There could be an earthquake here triggered by Japan's quake. It's not a warning at this case, it's just an alert to be prepared.
Just a reminder of how little we know about these things, right? Yeah. Thank you so much, Darlene.
You're welcome.
Today's devastating earthquake is among the 5 strongest recorded since 1900. The most powerful quake recorded in history struck Chile in 1960 with a magnitude of 9.5. The second largest was 2004's Indonesian earthquake, registering a 9.3. Today's disaster in Japan ranks 5th overall. A leading seismologist says it was a disaster decades in the making.
An earthquake like this takes a century or more to build up, and there have probably been large historical ones there in the past. On Wednesday, there was a magnitude 7 earthquake, and in hindsight, that was a foreshock. So at that point in time, there was no real indication that a big earthquake was about to happen.
And I will be joined by an earth scientist later in the broadcast to discuss how this disaster could help people here in BC prepare for a possible big one in this province. And with damage expected to be in the billions of dollars, Canada, the U.S., and dozens of other countries are pledging support for Japan. Global National's Shirley Engel is following the international reaction for us.
No matter how many times we see the images, it just doesn't seem real. The ripple effect felt around the world is both literal and emotional.
We do want to offer our heartfelt condolences to the Japanese people.
Stephen Harper and wife Lorene have been close with Japan's royal couple since their Canadian tour in 2009. Just months ago, the Emperor and Empress hosted them at the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. Today, the Prime Minister offered our help to the Japanese ambassador.
Since we are still in the process of identifying the damages and so on, we are not in a physical position to answer back to those kind of offers.
The Foreign Affairs Minister says our involvement in Libya won't impede our ability to help Japan.
In terms of humanitarian aid, that is one of our strong cards. In terms of desalination, those are things that we can do.
Calling the quake potentially catastrophic, Barack Obama expressed his condolences. The U.S. military has maintained a presence in Japan since World War II.
We currently have an aircraft carrier in Japan, and another is on its way. We also have a ship en route to the Marianas Islands to assist as needed.
On behalf of the United Nations, I want to express my deepest sympathies.
In Brussels, where many world leaders are gathering, shock and sadness.
We had a terrible reminder of the destructive power of nature, and everyone should be thinking of that country and their people.
Red Cross volunteers have been working around the clock to help with evacuation, search and rescue, and emergency first aid. Donations can be made online. At the Global Medic Warehouse in Toronto, a team is on standby for the go-ahead from Japanese officials.
We'll be on the first flight over.
Once again, nature's cruelty is spawning humanity's kindness. Shirley Engel, Global News, Ottawa.
And if you are having trouble contacting Canadian friends or family who are in Japan or may be affected by this quake, you can contact Foreign Affairs for help. And if you want to donate to disaster relief efforts, we have posted links to information on that and to some of the major aid agencies on our global website, globalnews.ca. We will have more coverage of the disaster in Japan later on in the broadcast, but coming up after the break. Why this disgraced senator still on the taxpayers' payroll could soon be going to jail. Also ahead.
We are slowly tightening the noose on Gaddafi.
More tough talk, but still no action from the global community as pro-Gaddafi forces continue gaining the upper hand against rebel fighters. That's next.
A song
to get it really cooking
by Paul Beckman, Polyrainbow Song, using A7, D, and F major 7. The song is going to be called What Can We Do to Help? What can we do to help now? What can the world do to help now? Can we do anything? Something, anything at all? What can we do to help? Well, they just flashed a number on the screen. Did you see it there? That's one thing. And if you need to get in touch,